Hey everyone, welcome back. After the last video, had a couple of people asking where you were from. They thought you might have been from Queens because of how well you knew Tough Tony, but actually you're not from Queens. You're from Brooklyn. Which part of Brooklyn are you from?
Bensonhurst.
Well, that's interesting because your family actually has a connection with someone who recently was released from prison through compassionate release. Before we get into that, I have a picture here I want to put up on the screen of someone you grew up with in that neighborhood. That was Alan Kaiser. Tell me a little bit about him.
I grew up on 20th Avenue and I went to grammar school on 68th Street and 20th Avenue, and Alan Kaiser was in that school. I had met him through after school activities. We were in the Cub Scouts together, the Weeblos. On Friday nights, we would go to a recreation. It was like 6 to 9 or something. And I would always be there on time. Most people would be on time. Alan never came on time. He was always like 10 minutes late. And I remember looking for him one day, and all of a sudden the counselor said, "Oh, look what the cat dragged in, Alan Kaiser." And at that point, all the kids turned and looked at him, and he was just a person that everyone noticed. And he was a very good kid. He was a good ping pong player. Like, I couldn't even get on the table with some of those guys, and Alan was the best at that. I was more of a dodgeball guy, but I was very sad to hear that years later that Alan was killed in Brooklyn. Mistaken identity. He was just walking his girlfriend home, an innocent kid, and left dead in the street. And it was really, really, really terrible. And Sammy the Bull was responsible for that.
Who did Sammy mistake him for?
I didn't remember when it happened. I just, read up on it a little bit. Um, a guy, Aldo, who had robbed one of his clubs or something.
You've actually been in contact with his sister. Did you know her as
Yeah,
well?
yeah. A while ago, I was in contact with her, and on Facebook. Um, she's been fighting for justice for Alan Kaiser for 45 years now. They should have charged Sammy Gravano with that murder, and they should have put some kind of judgment on him that the family, got, millions. They never did anything like that. It was really terrible the way the government handled that. It was very unfair to the Kaiser family or any kid that would happen to be left in the street like that. You know, uh, it must have been devastating to his mother and his family, or even the passerbys that seen a kid laying on the sidewalk. They're fighting as hard as they can. I would tell people don't even watch Sammy the Bull. Unfortunately, I know a few people that he killed, or I knew their families. Uh, my friend Tommy Spinelli, his father Tommy Sparrow, was killed by him. I knew DB Benedetto because he was the president of Great Bears, and I worked at a Great Bear. Um, he ruined so many families. He really ruined dozens of families, over nothing, greed or what have you. And he has no conscience. He's just a sociopath.
I don't think he's ever brought it up in conversation.
He brought up Alan Kaiser in a video, but it was all lies. He made it look like, from what I remember, that Alan was like menacing or threatening him or something like that, or he was on drugs or something. And it was just totally untrue. Alan Kaiser, he came from a good family. He was a good kid. He never got in trouble with the law or anything like that. No drugs, nothing. And it was he was the last kid that you would ever think that would get killed in Brooklyn.
Uh, you had you had asked me to put pictures up of the school and the stoop. What significance do these photos have?
Well, that was the grammar school that I went to with Alan Kaiser, and in the back in the schoolyard where the stoop is by the back door. Tommy Cetera from the neighborhood back then in like mid 80s. Um, Joey Palumbo and a few other guys used to have a weed spot there. Weed spots started popping up everywhere in Brooklyn, and they were very lucrative. And they were all like under the thumb of Greg Scarpa. and it was a good spot. They had lookouts, they had people like runners, taking cash back and forth, bringing a certain amount of weed, at a time. Uh, it was very sophisticated, and right on the side of the schoolyard where you could see, it was always empty, so cars could just pull up there. They'd pull up 6, 7 at a time, nonstop. The only hiccup that they had at the time was that with all these new people coming in the neighborhood, some guys from Bay Parkway, I don't want to mention one guy's name, but not, he's nothing anyway, but they started like burglarizing, residences over there. And it was, I guess, the mob, or, Greg Scarpa and his crew, they put it in check. I think they got some of the stuff back for some of the people, and nobody was ever bothered again. Back then in that neighborhood, they didn't go to the police. They went to like the local wise guy. And, Greg, had a big section of Brooklyn over there and kept it clean. There was really, no crime.
Now, your family does have a connection with the Scarpa family. One coincidence was that your stepfather and actually Greg Scarpa Sr. both contracted HIV from blood transfusions.
When my stepfather, I hadn't seen him in years, and he came to my house one day and he collapsed in the driveway and he said, "I'm dying. The hospital gave me bad blood." And I said to myself, I never heard of anything like this. Years later, I found out that Greg Scarpa Sr. had died from AIDS, Greg's father. Um, and then Arthur Ashe, also the famous tennis player. So that was a connection, I guess, a coincidence or whatever you call it, that we both had fathers that contacted AIDS from blood transfusion. My stepfather died in '88. He'd gotten the bad blood from Jamaica Hospital around early '80s. They didn't check the blood back then.
Now, do you consider, well, we'll back up a bit. So, Greg Scarpa Jr. was just released on compassionate release, very likely because he's sick.
Yes.
Do you consider Greg Scarpa Jr. a snitch or an informant? Are those two different things?
I don't know if it's two different things. I don't think he's either. He was always a nice guy. I remember when I was a kid, I was coming out of a Mike's candy store and I seen him with a few people. And I, was like kind of like meeting, like Joe DiMaggio or something, or Mickey Mantle or whatever. I was in awe of him, And I asked him I said, "Greg, you got $1 on you?" I was a poor kid, or $2. And he told me, he said, "Somebody told me you have a lot of money." And I looked at him like, "What?" And he was just kidding. And he gave me like a 10 or something. He was very well liked from people in Staten Island, people in Brooklyn. He made a lot of people rich. A lot of guys with the weed went on to get legitimate businesses and, walked away from the streets. And they were very successful and didn't do any time. But as far as, he gave information. Well, let's back up a little bit. While he was in prison, also he was approached by Lucchese mob boss Vic Musso, and Vic, was talking about his father, which he shouldn't have done. Then he started saying stuff about Greg, and Greg just, lost it and beat him to a pulp, banged his head against the bars, and heard from one source he pulled a toilet bowl up out of the ground or the wall and broke it on his fucking head. And he got balls that go from here to fucking New Jersey to do something like that back then. And he was put into like segregated section in Manhattan Correctional Facility, from what I know. And he was in there with a terrorist. I believe he gave information through a private investigator. First of all, I don't think the private investigator would have done anything unethical. They'll pull his license in a minute if he's trying to, involved in a scam. From there, years later, he was in with, what was his name? The other guy? Terry Nichols. And he gave information that Terry Nichols had a stash somewhere in the house with bombs and guns and ammo and what have you. The FBI already searched the house. They didn't find it. He kind of rubbed egg in their face because he found it. So the investigator took this information and gave it to a U.S. senator. that forced the FBI to search the house again, and they found it. A judge took 10 years off his sentence. And I think the FBI said, no, 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 we want him to do 40. And from what I feel, and what I know and heard, the FBI, first of all, wanted him to give information about mob guys. And he just wouldn't do it. He wouldn't give up any of his friends. He didn't give any information about mob guys. A terrorist, I'll say this, fuck them. You know, both of those guys were serving life in prison anyway. I think they should have gave him a fucking award and let him out of jail right away. That's my opinion.
And he had actually spoken to a news reporter, Sandra Harmon, or was she an author?
She was an author. I had talked to Sandra Harmon on the phone about Greg Scarpa before his compassion release because I read the book. I think it was called Mafia Son. And I liked it because it was very truthful, not made up stuff like, you know, all these other books, the Bath Avenue Crew, Michael Franzese books. It was real. And she felt so like drawn in to talk to me, somebody that actually knew about Greg Scarpa or his life or whatever. I mean, I wasn't best friends with him. He was older than me and what have you. I'll get into it. Um, she told me that all the information that he gave to the FBI was right on the money. And she said that they caused a lot of problems for her. She was getting dragged in and out of hearings and uh, trials with Lynn Delvecchio, the FBI handler of his father. And I just think they did him really, really dirty. They put him in Colorado into a supermax prison where he was in there 23 hours a day. The only thing he could do was write letters, read books, and work out. I was in solitary confinement for a year, and it was hell. I went in there at 185 pounds. I came out at 130. They starve you in there. They put you on a cement slab with a mattress that is literally 1 inch thick. There's no way you could lay on that bed all day long or whatever. Like you'll never be able to walk. Your back will kill you. Everything. And I think they treated him so unfairly. You know, sometimes the government with certain people, I think they get off on abusing people or what have you. You know, even in my case, a quarter gram of coke send me back to prison 7 times because they want information about Sonny or what have you. You know, that's not my job. That's, you know, not our job. That's their job, you know.
Do you think it was out of the ordinary for him to receive the compassionate release?
No, I think they should have gave it to him way before that. You know, from what I read and seeing him, he was so vibrant. And, you know, we all got old and changed or what have you. But he was in some shape, you know, when he was younger. And he was a handsome guy. He got a lot of girls when he was younger, and they all liked him. I think they should. I don't think he should have had a plea with his life, plead with them to give him that. They should have gave him that years ago. They probably gave him the friggin' cancer.
You had actually spoken to him a few years ago. He reached out to you, didn't he?
Yeah, he said to me, he texted me and he said, I'm a big fan of Sonny Franzese and Greg Sambita. You know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sonny talk. Let me tell you something. Sonny talked really good about him. You know, there was Staten Island guys too. I won't mention their names. That they looked up to him and they really liked him. You know, matter of fact, when I moved to Staten Island around had to be 85, 86. I remember I was with Dominic Faraci. He was Gus Faraci's cousin. He was involved in the murder of the DEA agent on Staten Island. And I took a ride with him and another guy, Richie, and I didn't even know where we're going. You know, like, they just come by my house, pick me up. I guess they, you know, grooming me or whatever you call it. And we drove by this house. I forget what part of Staten Island, but they picked me up in Annandale. It wasn't that far. And we pulled up and it was a brick wall. It had to be about 12 foot high. And I remember Dominic saying to Richie, it's friggin' Greg. He said, every time I come here, this wall's getting higher and higher. It was like a fortress. You know, I kind of imagine that, well, they had some kind of connection. I think it might have been with marijuana or what have you, you know. Dominic, I guess, went into the witness protection program. Gus got killed. And a lot of bad stuff happened from 88 to 90 and what have you. All right, Nick, thanks, man.
Not a problem. If you would like to support the channel, please check out our Patreon, where members will get access to our entire media catalog, including bonus videos, shoutouts, and even get a chance to have your questions answered by Greg. As usual, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.